They told her she was nothing. An orphan. Stray. A girl with no last name and no future, and no one in the world who would notice if she disappeared. They lied. They all lied. Because the night the most powerful Alpha King alive reached into the dark and pulled her out of the cold, he did not find a broken girl with nowhere to go. He found the one thing the most dangerous man in the world had spent 17 years trying to bury. And the moment he touched her hand, every wolf in 40,000 felt it. Every single one. Up. All at once. Like the world had just remembered something it was never supposed to forget. See, the king thought he was doing a small thing. Territorial claim. Mercy. He thought he was bringing home a stray. He had no idea he had just kidnapped the lost empress of a fallen empire. He had no idea that the orphan girl standing in his snow had smoke in her hands and black blood in her veins and a power so old it existed before wolves, before packs, before the very first alpha ever lifted his head and howled at the moon. He had no idea that 4,000 soldiers were already marching to take her back. And he had absolutely no idea that the thing she was hiding was not a weakness. It was a throne. Now here is what nobody tells you about this story. The king kneels. The girl does not beg. The empire does not rise the way empires rise in stories, with armies and war cries and gold banners catching the wind. It rises in silence, on a frozen wall, in the gray light before dawn, with one scarred hand refusing to let go. And if you think you know where this is going, I promise you on everything you do not. Because the moment she finally stops running and turns around to face everything that has been hunting her since she was 6 years old, what happens next is not what any story prepared you for. It is bigger than revenge. It is bigger than power. It is bigger than an empire reclaimed or a king redeemed or a war finally ended in the snow. It is the moment a girl who was told she was nothing opens everything she has been holding back for 12 years, and the world remembers what it felt like when something truly ancient and truly unstoppable decided that today was the day it was done being afraid. Stay with this story. Do not skip. Do not scroll. Because the ending will not just surprise you. It will sit in your chest for days. It will find you at 3 in the morning when you are trying to sleep. It will make you think about every time someone told you that you were too much or not enough, or simply not the kind of person that history bothers to remember. And it will make you wonder, what if they were wrong? What if they were always wrong? What if the most powerful thing in the room was never the one holding the throne? What if it was the one standing barefoot in the snow, bleeding, with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose? This is that story. And it starts right now. The girl ran barefoot through the frozen forest, and the mud swallowed her ankles like a hungry mouth. Pine needles sliced the soles of her feet. The blood she left behind was black in the moonlight. Behind her the wolves came. Not running. Not yet. They were walking because the Alpha King did not chase prey. He let it exhaust itself first. She could hear them. The slow, deliberate crack of massive paws on frost-hardened ground. The low resonance of a growl that was less sound and more pressure against her sternum. Her name was Sable. No last name. No pack. No history that anyone had bothered to write down. The orphanage matron had called her the feral one, because she did not cry when bones broke, and she did not sleep when the moon was full. She ran harder. The tree line opened into a clearing, and the snow here was undisturbed and blinding white, and she skidded to a stop because the Alpha King was already there. He had not been behind her. He had been ahead of her the entire time. He stood at the edge of the clearing in his human form, massive, carved from something harder than ordinary men, wearing nothing above the waist despite the temperature being 11 degrees below freezing. His eyes were gold, not amber, not brown with flecks of light. Pure metallic gold, the color of something molten and dangerous. "Orphan girl," he said, and his voice carried the particular stillness of someone who had never needed to raise it. "You crossed into Ashveil territory." Sable straightened her spine even though her legs were shaking. "I did not know where the border was." "Everyone knows where the border is. I am not from a pack." Something shifted behind his gold eyes. Not softness, not pity, but the precise, calculating attention of a predator recalibrating its assessment of what it had caught. "No," he said slowly. "You are not." His name was Caius Varan, Alpha King of the Ashveil Dominion, sovereign over 9 packs and 40,000 wolves, the only man in 3 centuries to have won the blood right. The ritual challenge that required killing the previous king with bare hands and surviving the power transfer, which killed most wolves outright from the sheer voltage of inherited dominance. He had survived it at 19. He was 26 now, and something in his chest had been wrong ever since. He called it a scar. His wolves called it the hollow, the place where his mate bond should have formed and had not. A void that made him colder every year, that made the gold in his eyes burn brighter and stranger. He looked at the orphan girl bleeding black blood into white snow. And the hollow did something it had never done before. Pulled. "You are coming with me," he said. It was not a question. She squared her jaw. "I am not pack property. You are in my territory, bleeding on my snow. And you are clearly being hunted by something other than my wolves." He watched her freeze. Because she had not told him that. Because she had not mentioned the other hunters. The ones who did not smell like wolves at all. The ones who smelled like old stone and burning silver, and the particular cold of a throne room where no fire had been lit in 17 years. "How did you know?" she whispered. He tapped 2 fingers against his sternum. "I can feel pursuit the way other men feel weather. It is a king's instinct." He extended one hand toward her. His palm was scarred from the bloodright, cross-hatched with silver burns that had never fully healed. "Come inside my borders, orphan girl. Whatever is hunting you will not follow into Ashveil." She should not have taken his hand. She knew that. But her feet were bleeding, and the temperature was dropping, and somewhere behind the tree line she could hear the stone and silver hunters moving closer, and so she crossed the clearing and took the hand of the Alpha King. His fingers closed around hers, and the entire forest went silent. Every wolf in his pack, scattered across 40 miles of territory, stopped moving at the same instant. Caius went rigid. The contact of her hand in his had sent something rocketing up his arm, through his shoulder, into the center of his chest where the hollow lived. Not filling it exactly, but illuminating it, the way lightning illuminates a room for one terrible, clarifying second. He saw something. He did not understand what he saw. A throne made of bone-white stone. A crown that was not a crown but a living thing. A collar of woven silver and black flame. A room full of people on their knees. And the girl, this barefoot bleeding girl, standing at the center of it, and the power coming off her was not the power of a wolf. It was older. It was the kind of power that existed before wolves, before packs, before the first alpha had ever lifted his head and howled at a full moon. It was imperial. Caius dropped her hand. He stepped back. His gold eyes were wide, which was an expression his wolves had never seen on his face because Caius Varan had not been surprised by anything in years. "Who are you?" he said. Not the lazy question he had asked at the clearing's edge. Something stripped down and urgent. "Sable," she said. "Just Sable. That is not what I am asking." The temperature in the clearing dropped another 4 degrees. Her breath came out in visible clouds, but the cold was not coming from the sky. It was coming from her. "You need to tell me," he said carefully, the way a man speaks when he is standing on ground he has just realized is not solid. "What you are." Sable looked at her own hands. The black blood from her feet had somehow migrated to her palms, and it was not behaving like blood anymore. Moved like smoke. Moved like intention. "I do not know," she said, and it was the truest thing she had ever said, and it was also a lie, because somewhere beneath the 17 years of not knowing, beneath the orphanage and the feral reputation and the full moons that kept her awake, there was a memory that was not her memory. A woman's voice. An empress's voice. Saying, "You will not remember until you are ready. And you will not be ready until someone with enough power to witness you finally takes your hand." Caius watched the black smoke curl from her palms and rise into the frozen air. His entire body was still with something that was not fear but was adjacent to fear. The sensation of recognizing that the world was larger and stranger than his understanding of it, and that he had just accidentally placed himself at the center of something that would not let him step back out. He had claimed an orphan girl. A standard territorial declaration, a protection measure, the kind of thing alpha kings did with unclaimed wolves found bleeding in their forests. He had not claimed a weapon. He had not claimed a mystery. He had not meant to reach across 17 years of hidden history and pull the lost empress of the old empire back into a world that had spent those 17 years pretending she was dead. "Sable," he said. She looked up. The smoke was thickening. The stone and silver hunters had reached the tree line, and when they saw what was rising from her hands, they stopped. And then, for the first time in Sable's memory, the hunters ran. Not toward her. Wait. Caius watched them go. Then he looked back at the girl standing in the center of a clearing that was beginning to glow faintly beneath her feet, the snow itself responding to whatever she was waking into. And he made the only calculation available to a king who had just realized the power he stumbled upon was not a weakness requiring protection but a force that would reshape the world. He could release her. He could honor the claim he had made and hold the border and deal with the consequences. Or he could do something no alpha king had done in recorded history. He lowered himself to one knee in the snow. The cold hit his bare skin like a blade. He did not flinch. "I claimed you as mine to protect," he said, voice low and stripped of all performance. "I did not know what I was claiming. But I do not take back what I have spoken." Sable stared at him. The most powerful wolf alive, kneeling in frozen mud, gold eyes steady, the scar on his palm still burning from where their hands had touched. "You should be afraid of me," she said. "I know," Caius said. And he stayed exactly where he was. The smoke from her hands rose higher. The forest held its breath. And somewhere deep in the Ashveil dominion, every wolf in 40,000 looked up from what they were doing and felt, for the first time, the particular resonance of a power older than their kind announcing, quietly, like a door opening rather than a wall falling, that it had finally come home. Sable did not know how long they stood there. The smoke from her palms continued to rise, slow and deliberate, like incense burned in a room where something sacred had just been decided. The snow beneath her feet had stopped being cold. That was the strangest part. 11 degrees below freezing, and the ground beneath her bare, bleeding feet was warm. Not hot, not uncomfortable, but warm in the way that old stone is warm when the sun has been on it all day, a stored warmth, a remembered warmth. As though the earth itself recognized the weight of what was standing on it. Caius remained kneeling. His broad back was straight, his scarred palm resting on his bent knee, and the cold was doing visible things to his skin. She could see the muscles along his shoulders tightening against it, could see the fine tension in his jaw, but he did not move. He was, she realized, the most disciplined creature she had ever encountered. Not disciplined the way the orphanage matron had tried to make her disciplined, through deprivation and correction, and the particular cruelty of withheld warmth. Disciplined the way a river is disciplined by its own current. From the inside. By something that had decided what it was and held that shape regardless of pressure. "Get up," Sable said finally. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. You do not need to do that. I know, Caius said, which was the same thing he had said before, delivered in exactly the same tone. Calm, undecorated, infuriatingly certain. Rose. The movement was smooth despite the cold, the kind of effortless physicality that came not from youth, but from a body that had been tested so many times it had simply stopped registering difficulty as significant. He stood at his full height, and Sable was not a small person. She was 5 feet 8 inches of lean, feral stubbornness, but he was still a great deal more of everything than she was, taller and broader and taking up space in a way that was not aggressive but simply undeniable, the way a mountain takes up space. He looked at her hands. The smoke was thinning now, pulled back slowly the way fog retreats when the sun strengthens. Her palms were clean again. No blood. No black smoke. Just her hands, bare and slightly trembling. Does it hurt? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Every other question he had asked her tonight had been tactical. Who are you, what are you, designed to extract information that was useful to a king making calculations. This question was different. This question was just a question. No, she said. Then, after a pause that she did not plan. It feels like pressure releasing. Like something that has been held too tight finally being allowed to open. He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he had suspected. Come, he said. He turned toward the eastern tree line, away from the direction the stone and silver hunters had fled. Sable did not move. You said you do not take back what you have spoken, she said. He stopped but did not turn around. I did say that. I need you to understand what that means before you decide it is still true. Now he turned. The gold in his eyes was steadier now. The initial shock of recognition settled back into the baseline intensity that was apparently just his face. Then tell me, he said. Sable pulled her thin coat tighter across her chest. It was a terrible coat, too small and missing 2 buttons, stolen from a charity box 3 towns back, and looked at a point slightly to the left of his shoulder because looking directly at him while saying this seemed like a structural error. I do not know the whole of what I am, she said. But I know pieces. I have always known pieces. I know that the people who were hunting me tonight were not after a stray wolf. I know that they have been hired by someone with enough resources to track a person across 4 countries and 12 years of deliberate disappearing. I know that whoever they work for will not stop because they ran tonight. She looked at him directly now. They ran because of what came out of my hands. When they recover from their fear, they will report back. And whoever sent them will send something worse. Caius was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the pines above them, a low, sustained sound like breathing. How much worse, he said. I do not know, she said. That is the honest answer. I do not know the ceiling of what they are willing to do because I do not know the ceiling of what I am worth to them. She watched his face. Nothing moved in it. And what are you worth to them, he asked. I think, Sable said carefully. The words shaped the way a person shapes words around something they have never said out loud before. That I am the only surviving heir to an empire that was declared destroyed 17 years ago. I think that the people who destroyed it are afraid that if I exist, if I am breathing and walking around and apparently capable of making trained hunters flee into the dark, then their claim to everything they took is not as permanent as they told everyone it was. The forest was very quiet. A single branch somewhere above them released its load of snow, and it fell in a soft collapse, barely audible. Caius said, "The Varenthus Empire." It was not a question this time either. Sable felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You know it," she said. "Every Alpha King learns the political history of the old world," he said. The Varenthus Empire fell 17 years ago. Official account. Internal collapse, a civil war, the imperial line ended. The official account is a construction, Sable said. It was not a civil war. It was a coordinated assassination. Every member of the imperial family in one night. Except one. Except you. Except me. The gold of his eyes caught the moonlight and held it. Caius Varan, Alpha King of the Ashveil Dominion, looked at the barefoot girl in the charity box coat standing in his snow, and something behind his expression shifted again. Not the tactical recalibration of before, but something slower and more significant, the particular gravity of a person understanding that the decision they made in the last 10 minutes was not the small decision they thought it was. You said whoever destroyed your empire will send something worse, he said. Yes. How much time do we have before they regroup? Sable blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, logistics had not been among them. A day perhaps. Maybe 2. Then we are not standing in the cold discussing history, he said. He turned back toward the eastern tree line. We are moving. The Ashveil stronghold was not what she had expected. She had expected something brutal. All fortified walls and iron, and the kind of deliberate intimidation that powerful men often built around themselves like a second skin. What she found instead, when they emerged from the forest 3 miles east, was a compound that sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines like something that had grown there. Low stone buildings connected by covered walkways, enormous pine trees deliberately left standing between the structures so that the whole thing was half hidden even at close range. It smelled of wood smoke and pine resin and something animal and warm underneath. The layered scent of a place where many large bodies slept and lived and breathed. Smelled like safety. That observation made Sable deeply uncomfortable. She had not associated anywhere with safety in so long that the sensation felt like a trick. They passed through a heavy gate, and the wolves who guarded it, 2 men and a woman, all of them massive in the way that high-ranking pack wolves are massive, the dominance of their rank pressed into their physical form. All 3 of them looked at Caius and then at Sable and then back at Caius with expressions of carefully neutral inquiry. Territorial claim, Caius said to them without breaking stride. She is under Ashveil protection. Alpha, said the woman guard, and there was something compressed into the word. Some additional question that did not quite make it out. Caius's pace did not change. Whatever it is, bring it to me in the morning, he said. The guard did not push. Inside the main building, Sable was given a room. It was plain and warm and had a proper door with a working lock, and a hearth already burning, and a pair of boots by the bed that were almost her size. She stood in the center of it for a long time after Caius left. She looked at her hands. Ordinary hands. No smoke. No heat. No terrifying ancient power announcing itself to the night air. Just her hands, the left one with a small scar along the index finger from a kitchen accident when she was 9, the right one with a callus at the base of the palm from years of carrying whatever needed carrying. She was so tired. She sat on the edge of the bed, and the exhaustion hit her all at once the way it always did when the immediate danger passed, like a wave she had been outrunning that finally caught her, and she pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes and breathed. She did not cry. She had not cried in a very long time. She did not know if she still knew how. Caius did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window of his study and looked out at the dark valley and felt the hollow in his chest doing something new. It was not aching the way it usually ached. It was not empty the way it was usually empty. It was attending. That was the closest word he had. Attending, the way a person leans forward when something important is being said. Oriented. Pointed toward the room 2 floors below where the girl who was not an orphan was sitting on a bed. He suspected she was not sleeping in. Caius was not a man who experienced confusion as a prolonged state. He identified problems, assessed variables, made decisions, and moved. Confusion was a gap between identifying and assessing, and he had trained himself to close that gap quickly. But tonight the gap was not closing. Because the variables did not resolve. Because one end of the equation was a 17-year-old political reality he understood. The fall of the Varenthis Empire, the power vacuum that had followed, the coalition of warlords and lesser rulers who had divided its territory and spent the years since consolidating their takings. And the other end of the equation was a girl with smoke in her hands and black blood, and a warmth that came off her in the cold that had nothing to do with body temperature. Because the Varenthis Empire had not been a wolf empire. It had been something older. Something the history that Alpha Kings were made to study described only in the past tense, with a careful grammar reserved for things that no longer existed and were therefore safe to acknowledge. The Varenthis had been imperials. Not a supernatural classification that the modern world used, but an old one. A line of rulers whose power was not inherited through genes the way wolf dominance was, but through something more like succession, a power that waited in the world like water waiting in the ground and rose up through the chosen line, generation by generation accumulating. The history books said the power died with the empire. Caius had believed that because there was no functional reason not to. Now he sat in his chair at 2 a.m. and turned over the image of black smoke rising from a girl's palms like something that had been waiting a very long time to be let out, and he thought, the history books were incomplete. A knock at his study door. "Come," he said. The door opened. Rael entered. Rael was Caius's second. His enforcer. His most trusted general. The wolf who had stood at his left shoulder since the bloodright and had never once given him cause to doubt his loyalty. He was also, unfortunately, the kind of man whose face communicated everything he was thinking in real time, which meant that the expression he was wearing when he entered the study, careful, neutral, the expression of a man holding something complicated very still, communicated that he was holding something complicated very still. "Talk," Caius said. Rael closed the door behind him. He was holding a piece of paper. He set it on the desk in front of Caius without a word. Caius looked at it. It was a message, written on the kind of heavy, cream-colored paper that cost more per sheet than most families spent on food in a week. The ink was dark red. The seal at the bottom was a crest Caius recognized immediately. A tower with a broken crown above it, the sigil of the Conclave of 12, the coalition of warlords who had divided Varenthis territory after the empire's fall and had spent 17 years making sure everyone understood that the division was permanent. He read the message. It was not long. It said, "We understand you have taken in a stray. We are interested in reclaiming our property. Name your price. We are reasonable men." Caius set the message down. He looked at the red ink for a moment, the color of it, the deliberate choice of it. Not actual blood but the suggestion of blood, the implication that the sender was familiar enough with blood to use its color as casual stationery. "When did this arrive?" he said. 20 minutes ago, Rael said. Ryder came to the south gate. Pack member Ashveil born, which is how he got through the perimeter. He has been turned since. His scent is wrong, there is something layered over his own smell, something like old stone and silver, Caius said. "Yes," Rael said, and his careful neutrality cracked slightly to let through a sliver of unease. "How did you?" "The hunters she described. That is their signature." Rael was quiet for a moment. "Caius," he said, using the name rather than the title, which he only did when he was speaking to the man rather than the king. "Who is she?" Caius looked at the broken crown seal on the cream paper. "Someone the Conclave of 12 is very interested in recovering," he said. "That is not an answer." "No," Caius agreed. "It is not." He stood. He picked up the message and turned it over in his hands once, then set it down again. "Reinforce the south and east perimeters. Rotate the interior guard to a 6-hour cycle instead of 12. I want 3 additional wolves on the main building at all times. And I want them to be people whose loyalty you are personally certain of." Rael absorbed this. "That is a war footing," he said. Yes, Caius said. It is. Rael looked at him for a long moment with a particular searching expression of someone who has known a person long enough to read the edges of what they are not saying. The hollow, Rael said carefully. Caius's jaw tightened. It was the only visible response, and he allowed it because Rael had earned the right to notice such things. What about it? Caius said. When she came through the gate, Rael said. I was standing at the east window. I felt the pack shift. All of them, all at once, like something settling. Like a frequency that had been slightly off for a long time suddenly correcting. Caius said nothing. The older wolves are already talking, Rael continued. Not loudly. But they are talking. They can talk quietly, Caius said. Or not at all if they prefer. They are saying she is the reason the hollow has not killed you yet, Rael said, and his voice was flat and factual, because Rael delivered uncomfortable truths the same way he delivered all truths, without decoration, because he had decided long ago that kindness in the delivery of hard facts was a form of disrespect. Caius turned toward the window. Outside, the valley was dark and still, the snow undisturbed, the pines standing in their rows like witnesses. The conclave's message, he said. What do you want done with the rider? Rael accepted the redirect. Holding him at the south gate. Whatever they put on him, it is not a full turn. He still has his mind. He is frightened. Keep him comfortable. Do not let him send any communication back. And the message itself. Do you intend to respond? Caius looked at the broken crown seal one final time. Not tonight, he said. Sable was awake when the knock came at her door. She had not slept. She had sat on the bed for a while, then moved to the floor in front of the hearth because the floor was cooler and the cool helped her think, and she had been thinking for 2 hours about the particular problem of what came next. What came next was always the problem. Surviving the immediate moment was something she had become very good at over 12 years of practice. It was the aftermath of surviving that consistently confounded her. She crossed to the door and opened it without asking who was there, because she could feel through the wood that it was him. Some new, strange sense that had apparently activated itself along with the smoke and the warmth, a kind of awareness of his presence that felt less like a supernatural ability and more like a compass finding north. She was not sure how she felt about that. Caius stood in the doorway. He had found a shirt at some point, dark and plain, and he looked at her with the gold of his eyes steady and assessing in the way she was already beginning to recognize as his baseline, the permanent evaluation of a person who could not afford to stop paying attention. There is something you need to see, he said. He held out the cream-colored paper. Sable took it. She read it. Her face did not change because she had learned very young to keep her face still when she was frightened, because frightened faces invited attention, and attention in her life had never been the protective kind. But her hands went very still on the paper. The same stillness as before. A held breath quality, something building beneath the surface. The conclave, she said. Yes. How long has it been since the hunters fled? 3 hours, Caius said. They regrouped faster than you thought. They always do, she said. She handed the paper back to him. She turned back to the room and stood with her back to him for a moment, looking at the hearth, and the fire responded to something. The shift in her breathing, the tightening of the thing in her chest. By burning several degrees hotter for a few seconds, the flames going from orange to a blue-edged white before settling back. They will not negotiate, she said. The message says they are reasonable men. Reasonable men do not spend 12 years hunting a child across 4 countries, she said. The message is a test. They want to know if you are the kind of ruler who can be bought. If you respond at all, you have already told them something useful. She heard him move into the room. Not toward her. He stopped several feet inside the doorway, and she could feel the careful deliberateness of that distance, the choice to leave her space. What do they want with you specifically? He said. They want me dead, she said simply. They wanted that 17 years ago and they want it now. The only reason the message says, reclaim, instead of something more direct is because they do not know yet what I am capable of. And people who operate through hired hunters are people who manage risk carefully. They will not commit to a direct approach until they have assessed what it will cost. The smoke, Caius said. Yes. What is it? Sable turned from the fire. She looked at him. The room was warm, the hearth throwing amber light across everything, and Caius Varan standing in the middle of it looked like something out of the older stories, the ones that were not really stories but compressed history, the kind of man that wars got fought over and around and sometimes because of. I do not know its name, she said. I know what it does. Or what it has done, the 3 times it has come out before tonight. 3 times, he said. Once when I was 6 and a man at the orphanage put his hands on me in a way that he should not have, she said, and her voice was flat and even, the flatness of someone who has processed something so many times it has become a fact rather than a wound. He stopped being able to hurt anyone after that. He stopped being able to do much of anything. Caius's expression did not change. But something in his eyes went very, very still. Once when I was 11 and the orphanage caught fire and there were children still inside, she said. I walked back in. The fire moved around me. I brought out every child in the building. No one could explain it. And the 3rd time, he said. 8 months ago, she said. A Conclave agent cornered me in a city 300 miles from here. He was holding a silver knife and he was very certain of himself. She looked at her hands. He was less certain afterward. The fire snapped behind her. So it is defensive, Caius said. It responds to threat. It responds to something, she said. Threat is the closest word. But tonight was the first time it responded to something that was not a threat. When you took my hand. She said that last part without looking at him. She heard the quality of his silence change. What did it feel like, he asked. The question again with that stripped-down directness, not tactical, just actual. Like being recognized, she said. Like something inside me that has been waiting to be seen finally. Felt seen. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving through the valley in long gusts that pressed against the window glass. The conclave will make a second approach, Caius said finally, returning to the problem, to the facts, to the ground beneath their feet. Yes, she said, grateful for the return. How many men does the conclave have in total, he said. More than you, she said honestly. They have 12 territories, 12 armies, 17 years of consolidated resources. But they did not know about the smoke until tonight. No. Then they have been operating on the assumption that you are an undefended target. A symbolic problem. An heir with no power base, no pack, no resources. Yes, she said. That assumption is no longer accurate, Caius said. Something in his voice had changed. Not warmer exactly. Warmer was not the right word for anything involving Caius Varan. But resolved in a new direction. You claimed me, Sable said carefully. As a territorial protection measure. You did not know what you were claiming. I am giving you the opportunity to reconsider. You said that already, he said. I said you should be afraid of me. You did, he agreed. And I told you that I know. He crossed his arms over his chest, and she noticed again the scar on his palm, the silver burns cross-hatched into his skin, and she thought about what it must have taken to survive the thing that left those marks. Here is what I know, he said. I know that the Conclave of 12 has just attempted to purchase a person who is standing in my territory under my claim. I know that this constitutes an act of disrespect that I would respond to regardless of who the person was. I know that the person in question has a capacity for power that I do not fully understand, and that she does not fully understand, which makes her either very dangerous or very useful or most likely both. He met her eyes. And I know that when I touched your hand, the hollow in my chest oriented toward you like a compass finding north for the first time in 7 years. Sable went very still. I am not telling you that to pressure you, he said, and his voice was careful and deliberate. I am telling you because you are about to have to make decisions with incomplete information, and I would rather the information be less incomplete. She stared at him. What is the hollow? She said. A wound, he said. From the blood right, where my mate bond should be and is not. It has been. He paused, the pause of a man choosing precision over ease. Progressively destabilizing. The older wolves believe it will eventually. That I cannot. He stopped. Started again. They believe a king cannot hold his power indefinitely without an anchor. Without someone the bond would have gone to. Sable breathed slowly. You think I am your anchor, she said. I think, he said carefully, that you are something I did not have a category for before tonight. I am reluctant to assign categories too quickly. But the hollow pointed toward me. Yes. And you are telling me this because you want me to make decisions with complete information. Yes. She looked at the fire. She thought about compasses finding north. She thought about the old Empress's voice in the memory that was not her memory. You will not be ready until someone with enough power to witness you finally takes your hand. She thought about 12 years of running. She thought about the cream-colored paper with its red ink and its broken crown seal. She thought about what it would mean to stop running. What it would mean to turn around. What it would mean to stop being something hunted and become something else. Something that could not be easily named. Something that the Conclave of 12, with all their armies and all their consolidated power and all their 17 years of certainty, had not included in their calculations. She looked at Caius. You should know, she said, that if I stop running they will not send hunters next time. They will send something that cannot be frightened away by smoke in the dark. I know, he said. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true, he said. The fire burned steady and bright behind her. Outside, the wind moved through the valley. Inside the compound, 40,000 wolves slept or kept watch, and something in the center of all of it, in the chest of the king, in the hands of the girl, in the cold air between them, was quietly, irrevocably, shifting into a shape that had not existed in the world before tonight. Sable uncrossed her arms. She looked at her hands one more time. Then we had better figure out what I am, she said, before they figure out how to stop me. The gold in Caius's eyes burned steadier than the fire. Yes, he said. We had better. The conclave came on the third day. Not with hunters. Not with riders carrying cream-colored paper and red ink suggestions. They came with an army. 12 banners cresting the northern ridge at dawn, each one bearing the broken crown sigil of a different warlord, and behind the banners came the soldiers. Not wolves, not entirely, something in between, men and women who had been altered by the same old stone and silver process that had turned the Ashveil rider, stripped of their fear and most of their hesitation and the particular humanity that makes a person pause before they destroy something. Sable stood on the wall walk of the Ashveil stronghold and watched them come. The cold hit her face like a flat hand. The sky above the ridge was the specific gray of iron that has been left in rain, low and pressed down, the kind of sky that does not allow for the possibility of light. Behind her, she could hear the compound moving. The sound of a pack preparing. Not chaotic, not panicked, but the dense and purposeful sound of people who have drilled for this, who know their positions, who trust the man giving the orders enough to move at his word without needing to understand every variable. She heard Caius's voice below, low and carrying, distributing commands the way water is distributed through stone, finding every channel, reaching every place it needed to reach. She had spent 3 days in the Ashveil stronghold. 3 days that had been the strangest of her life. Stranger even than the night in the clearing. Because in those 3 days something had been happening that she did not have a word for. Rael had brought her books. Old ones from the stronghold's archive. Histories that had not been sanitized by the Conclave's 17 years of controlling the official narrative. She had read for 2 days almost without stopping. She had read about the Varenthis Empire at its height. About the imperials and the nature of their power. About the succession, not genetic but chosen, the power selecting its vessel the way lightning selects the tallest point in a field, not randomly but according to a logic that was its own. She had read about what the power could do in its full expression. And the reading had been like pressing on a bruise that turned out to be a door. Every page had opened something in her that had been closed so long she had assumed it was simply absent. She was not powerful despite surviving. She had survived because she was powerful. The power had been protecting her the whole time, quietly, without her understanding or consent, steering the hunters slightly wrong, making the silver slightly less effective, keeping her alive across 12 years of circumstances that should have killed her several times over. It had been waiting. It had been so patient. And now, on the 3rd morning, with 12 banners on the ridge and an army moving down the slope in the iron sky dawn, the patience was ending. She heard boots on the wall walk behind her. She did not need to turn. "How many?" she said. 4,000 approximately, Caius said, coming to stand beside her at the wall. "Against how many of yours?" 800, he said. He said it without performance, without the false inflation of confidence that men sometimes use to cover the reality of numbers. Just the number, clean and honest. "Caius," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the title. She felt him register it. A slight shift in his breathing, barely perceptible. "I know," he said. "Do not say that right now," she said. Something that was almost a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "What would you have me say?" She turned to look at him. The light was bad and the cold was brutal, and he had been awake for most of 3 days and none of it showed in his face in any way that diminished him. He looked the way old stone looks, permanent, like something that does not negotiate with weather. But his eyes were doing something she had not seen them do before. Behind the gold, behind the steady assessment, something was present that had not been there on the first night. Something that was afraid. Not of the army. Not of the numbers. She understood suddenly and completely that Caius Varan was afraid of losing her. Not as a political asset. Not as a power source. Or the orphan girl in the charity box coat who had bled black blood into his snow. The understanding hit her somewhere central and structural, the way a note hits a tuning fork. Not on the surface but in the resonant core. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "The hollow," he said, "has been silent for 3 days." She held his gaze. "Silent," she said. "Not aching. Not empty. Silent. The way a wound is silent when it has finally been given what it needs to begin closing." Below the wall, she could hear Rael organizing the pack into defensive formations. The snap of orders, the movement of large bodies, the particular low-frequency tension that ran through a group of people who were about to be tested. "I am going to do something," Sable said. "I know," he said, and this time the words were different. Not the flat certainty of before but something that cost him. The 2 words of a person who understands what is coming and is choosing not to stop it. "I do not know what it will look like," she said. "I have never done it in full. I do not know what full is." "The books," he said. "What did they tell you?" She looked back at the advancing army. The front line was perhaps a mile from the walls now, moving with the slow and deliberate pace of something that believes it has already won. They told me that the last Empress to use the full expression of the power did not survive it, Sable said. She felt him go very still beside her. She used it to end a war, Sable said. 700 years ago. She stood on a battlefield and she opened everything she had, everything the power had accumulated through 15 generations of the Varenthus line, and she ended it. And it ended her. The silence between them was the heaviest thing she had ever stood inside. Sable, Caius said. But that was 700 years ago, she said. Before the power had another 700 years to accumulate. And it has not been used. Not once since then, not fully, just the edges of it, the smoke, the warmth, the protection. All of that has been the surface. The way you can see the surface of the ocean and have no concept of the depth. You do not know if you can survive it, he said. No, she said. But I know that 4,000 altered soldiers will destroy this pack. My pack, he said. Yes, she said. Your 800 wolves who are down there right now because you claimed an orphan girl in the dark and did not take it back. She turned to face him fully. I will not let them die for a decision you made in good faith, she said. That is not, he started. Caius. He stopped. I am not doing it for the Empire, she said. I am not doing it because of thrones or bloodlines or the accumulated logic of 17 years of being hunted. I am doing it because of your 800 wolves. Because of Rael, who brings me books and delivers hard truths without decoration because he respects people enough not to soften things. Because of the guard at the gate who had a question she did not ask and will have to wait until morning that may not come. Because you knelt in the snow when you did not have to and you stayed there and you said you do not take back what you have spoken. She could feel the power moving through her now. Not the tentative bleed of before but something systemic. Something that was reorganizing the way blood is reorganized when the heart decides to beat harder. I am doing it, she said. Because for the first time in 12 years I am standing somewhere that feels like it could be home, and I am not willing to watch it burn. Caius looked at her. The gold of his eyes was incandescent in the gray morning light. He reached out and took her hand. His scarred palm against hers. The same contact as the first night, the same electric recognition. But different now, 3 days different, heavier and more deliberate. Then I am standing here, he said. While you do it. You should get behind the walls, she said. No, he said simply. Caius. I am the Alpha King of the Ashveil Dominion, he said. I do not retreat from my own walls. His hand tightened on hers. And I do not let go of what I have claimed. Below them, the army reached the half-mile mark. She could see their faces now. Blank in the particular way of the altered, wiped clean of hesitation, 12 banners snapping in the cold wind above them. Sable closed her eyes. She had read about this part. The books had described it as a surrender. Not defeat, but the specific surrender of a person who stops holding themselves back from what they are. The distinction had seemed academic when she read it. Did not seem academic now. She thought about everything she had held back across 12 years. The full voice of her cry when she was hurt, because crying attracted attention. The full force of her anger when the orphanage was unjust, because anger attracted punishment. The full weight of her grief for parents she did not remember but whose absence had been a physical presence in her life, a shape made of empty space. The full acknowledgement of what she was, because knowing what you are makes you responsible for it. She had been holding herself at a fraction for so long that the fraction had started to feel like the whole. Let go. It was not dramatic, the internal moment of it. It was quiet. The way a fist unclenches quietly. The way held breath is released quietly. The way a door that has been locked from the inside finally swings open on a morning when someone turns the key. The power came up from her the way a tide comes in. Not a wave. Tide. Inexorable. Complete. The smoke was first. Black and dense and moving with the purposefulness of something that knew what it was for, rising from her hands and spreading outward. And where it spread the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 seconds, and the sound that accompanied it was not a sound so much as a frequency. Below hearing, felt in the chest, in the sternum, in the bones. The army stopped. Every soldier at the front line stopped simultaneously. Not a tactical halt. A physical interruption, as though something essential to forward motion had been removed from the equation. Caius felt it through their joined hands, the full reality of what he had taken the hand of on that first night. He had thought, in the 3 days since, that he had been beginning to understand. He had not been beginning to understand. He had been standing at the edge of a continent thinking he could see the other shore. The power that moved through Sable now was not the power of a wolf. It was not the dominance of an alpha, the inherited authority of a bloodline of warriors. It was something that predated all of that. Something that had existed before the first wolf looked at the moon and felt the pull of it. Something that the world had built into its deepest structure, the way the world builds fault lines and ocean trenches. Not as mistakes but as necessary architecture, as places where the pressure that accumulates in the ordinary rock of existence must eventually, inevitably find release. It was the power of an empire at its fullest. 15 generations of Varenthus rulers, every increment of power they had drawn up and used and returned to the line, every sacrifice and every act of governance and every moment of sovereign will. All of it held in trust across 700 years, waiting for the vessel that would be strong enough and broken enough and whole enough to carry it. Sable was all three. The smoke reached the army. And the soldiers began to remember themselves. That was the only way to describe what happened. The alteration, the process that had stripped them of hesitation and humanity and the complex, inconvenient machinery of conscience. The smoke undid it. Not with violence. Not with the burning devastation of an imperial power exercised as a weapon. With recognition. Each soldier the smoke reached stood suddenly in the full presence of what they were. Not altered soldiers in service of a conclave they feared, but people with names and histories and the specific griefs and joys that constitute a human life. And the forgetting that had been done to them was undone. And they stood blinking in the cold dawn air like people emerging from a room where the light has been very wrong for a very long time. Weapons dropped. 12 banners wavered. 3 went down. Then 6. Then all 12. Sable heard, distantly as though through water, the sound of rail below the wall saying something she could not make out, and then the sound of her name from several voices, and then nothing, because the power was asking for the last of her and she was giving it. She was not afraid. That was the revelation of the last moment before everything became very bright and very still. She had spent 12 years being afraid. Afraid of the hunters, afraid of being found, afraid of the power in her hands, afraid of what she was and what it would cost and what it would require. And here at the end of all that running, with her hand in the hand of an alpha king who had knelt in the snow and stayed there, she was not afraid. She was, for the first time in her memory, exactly what she was and nowhere else. The light that came was not the smoke. It was behind the smoke. Beneath it. White and absolute, the way the very first light must have been before the world had enough history to complicate it. It came from her and went outward in all directions simultaneously. And where it touched the altered soldiers it completed what the smoke had begun, and where it touched the walls of the Ashveil compound it moved through the stone like warmth through old rock, and where it touched the 800 wolves of the Ashveil pack they felt it as a chord, something that resonated with the oldest part of what they were, the part that remembered when the world was new and the distinction between wolf. And something else was not yet a distinction. And where it touched Caius Varan, Alpha King, it found the hollow. The hollow that had been awound for 7 years. The hollow that had been aching and empty and progressively consuming him from the inside. The light did not fill it. It did not patch it or repair it or replace what was missing. It revealed that the hollow had always been this shape. Specifically, precisely, deliberately this shape. The exact negative space of what Sable was, carved into him at the bloodrite not as a wound but as a waiting, a preparation, a space made ready for something that was not yet present. The two of them were not halves of a whole. They were not the simple completion of a mate bond. They were something the world had been building toward with the patience of deep time. An anchor and a tide, a king and an empress, the dominance of a wolf line and the accumulated sovereignty of an imperial one, two kinds of power that should by all logic have nothing to do with each other, discovering in a frozen clearing in the middle of the night that they were, in fact, the exact shape of each other's missing architecture. The light held for a long moment. Then it began to pull back. And with it went Sable. She felt herself going. Not dying, or not only dying. More like being drawn toward something on the other side of a boundary she had not known existed. The hand holding hers tightened. Not a panicked grip. Not desperate. Absolute. The grip of a man who does not take back what he has spoken. She felt the hollow through their joined hands. Open now, resonant, no longer a wound but a window. And through it she felt the full force of what Caius Varan was. Not the king. Not the dominance or the title or the gold of his eyes. The man. The 19-year-old who had survived something that should have killed him because he was, at his deepest structure, too stubborn to be ended. The man who had knelt in the snow not because protocol required it, but because the truth required it. The man who had said I know and stayed. The power reached the boundary. And stopped. Because something on this side of the boundary was heavier. Not stronger. Heavier. The weight of a hand that would not let go. The weight of 800 wolves and their one stubborn, incandescent king. The weight of 3 days and books and boots by the bed, and a compass finally finding north. The weight of home. Sable came back. It was not graceful. She became aware of the wall walk beneath her knees first. She had gone down without knowing it. And then the cold, which was considerable, and then the sound of the valley, which was very strange. No battle sounds. No clash of weapons or shouted orders. Silence. And then, breaking into the silence from below the wall, from the valley beyond, from the slowly waking ranks of 4,000 soldiers who were remembering their own names, a sound she had never heard directed at her before. People calling her name. Not Sable. The other name. The one she had read in the books. The imperial name that had been assigned to the heir of the Varenthus line at birth, and kept from her for her protection, and whispered now from the lips of people who had been altered into forgetting everything, including mercy, and had been given it back. Caius was kneeling beside her. Not the formal kneel of that first night. Both knees on the cold stone, his hands on her face. His gold eyes doing something she did not have language for. Searching and finding what he was looking for. You came back, he said. Not a question. Not a command. The 3 words of a man who had been prepared to live with the answer being different and was not. You did not let go, she said. Her voice was wrecked, scraped clean of everything extra. No, he said. I did not. She looked at him. The gray morning light had changed. The iron sky had broken somewhere to the east and a line of actual gold was pressing through the clouds, thin and determined. The specific gold of very early sun finding its way through what had seemed like an impenetrable overcast. The Conclave, she said. Their army is standing in the valley without weapons. Rael's voice came from somewhere behind her, and she turned to find him at the top of the wall walk stairs. His expression the most openly undone she had ever seen it. 4,000 people asking to be pointed toward home. And the 12 lords of the Conclave. Caius said, not looking away from Sable. 3 of them fled when the light came. The other 9 are at the south gate. They appear to be engaged in something I can only describe as extremely sincere repentance. Something moved across Caius's face. The ghost of a different expression. "Leave them there for a while," he said. Rael wisely asked no further questions. His boots retreated down the stairs. Caius looked at Sable. Sable looked at Caius. Between them, the morning was getting lighter by degrees. The gold in his eyes matched it. She thought about the orphanage. She thought about the charity box coat. She thought about 12 years of running and the particular exhaustion of being hunted and the way safety, when she had first smelled it on the air of this compound, had felt like a trick. It had not been a trick. She thought about her parents, who she did not remember but who had hidden her carefully enough and loved her efficiently enough to give her a chance at a night exactly like this one. She thought about a woman's voice in a memory that was not her memory. You will not be ready until someone with enough power to witness you finally takes your hand. She looked at the scar on Caius's palm. She looked at her own hand resting in his. She thought, I did not know this was what ready would look like. She thought, it is exactly this. What happens now, she said. Caius considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Now, he said, we deal with 9 repentant warlords and 4,000 people who need to be fed and pointed home. And after that, he said, we begin the very long and complicated work of what comes next. The Empire, she said. Among other things, he said, and his voice had the particular weight of a man who is including several things in 2 words and choosing not to list them because the wall walk of a fortress in the early morning after a battle is perhaps not the right place. She understood him exactly. That was new also. She got to her feet. He rose with her, which was becoming a pattern. She turned to face the valley. The army below was dispersing slowly, not fleeing, not retreating, just gradually becoming 4,000 individuals again instead of one instrument, finding one another and speaking in low voices and looking at their hands the way she had looked at hers so many times. The light from the east was strengthening. The snow on the valley floor caught it and threw it back, and the whole wide expanse of Ashveil territory was gold and white and enormous. She stood at the edge of the wall walk with the morning coming in. The last Empress of the Varenthus stood on the wall of a wolf king's fortress, and she was barefoot again. She had lost the boots somewhere in the descent to her knees, and her feet were cold on the stone, and behind her was a man made of old winter and gold and the particular stubbornness of things that refused to be ended, and in front of her was everything that had to be done and all the time that remained to do it. She was not afraid. She had come too far through too much darkness, held together by too little and survived anyway, to be afraid of the morning. She had been an orphan with no last name. She had been a stray in someone else's snow. She had been the lost thing that the world had given up on, the heir to an erased empire, the power that everyone who feared it had spent 17 years trying to convince the world did not exist. And she had been found, not by a search, not by a plan, by a man who had extended a scarred hand in the dark and said, "Come inside my borders," and then refused, with the full and unreasonable force of his nature, to take it back. They had not saved each other. They had done something harder and stranger and more permanent than that. They had stayed. And in a world that had spent 17 years perfecting the art of erasure, erasing empires, erasing heirs, erasing the memory of what power looked like when it was used for something other than control, staying was the most revolutionary act remaining. The Empress and the Alpha King stood in the first gold of the morning. The valley spread before them, healing. The smoke had long since cleared. What remained was only light. And history finally beginning to remember itself. They would say in the years that followed, that the Ashveil king had ridden out to claim a stray and returned with an empire. They would say the Empress had arrived with nothing and ended a war with her bare hands. They would say many things because people always say many things about events that are larger than their language. But those who had been there, Rael and the guard at the gate, and the 800 wolves who had felt the light move through them like the memory of something ancient and good. Those people did not say much at all. They did not need to. They had stood in the valley on the morning when the lost girl came home. And some things are not stories. Some things are just true. And the truest things never need telling. They simply endure.